so others of that refugee student group married others. And I realized that the symbolism of that is they married into a family, they married into a community. But both my parents, they were like orphans.
Yeah.
They married each other. So that meant that two orphans, in a way, got together with no other family members.
Just imagine.
Yes, and then it follows then the immigration pattern that so many families now are dealing with. My father did well in school, so he got a chance to get a fellowship to come abroad to study. At that time, I was already 2 years old, and my brother John had just been born.
Your brother is older?
He's younger.
Okay.
2 years younger. I have two brothers, one 2 years younger and one 8 years younger. But the point is that he left to come to America. So there will be people who are going to deal with aging parents who had come abroad as students to study in the American institutions, the academic institutions. So once again, they are leaving families behind. So now, as this group of people have hit their 70s and 80s, they came as young students, then now they're aging. So I think it's very important to understand that perhaps this is a phenomenon that is only going to happen once in world history, but it's happened to us. And so I hope that I can help younger immigrant children understand that if your parents came abroad, whether to chase the American dream, to get an education,
Like
whatever, now they're going to age here. For my parents, there was no decision to go back because for us as, their children to go back into a Chinese school system where we had never learned Chinese to read or write would have been too tough. So they stayed on. Then they got into their 40s, their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So the implications are for immigrants, there's going to be a very different, what I call trajectory of family caregiving, because let's say they did have family. Many of them would be back in Asia. So there's a term for this, which is transnational family caregivers.
Transnational family caregivers.
Because it's crossing borders and time zones. So there are people who have had to deal with, when do you call someone in India to ask if they've had. So many issues that many people don't understand until they realize that family caregiving, it's a lot more complicated than, let's say, living in New York and your mother's in Southern California. So the immigrant perspective is very key to understand.
And being an Asian American caregiver, there's a lot of different challenges. There's cultural barriers, generational barriers, language, you name it. What were some of the challenges that you faced? And I'm sure your story also has connected with a lot of people's hearts as well.
Yes. Well, I've often said that there are the universal things. There are definitely going to be financial implications. There's going to be other things related to medications. There's the social. There's a lot of other things. But I think for Asian American and Pacific Islander, perhaps there are other cultural norms, heritage, and traditions that add a different layer. Because in the Chinese tradition, the Confucian concept of filial piety, 孝顺, I'll get all this praise from these aunties who are friends of my mother. Oh, your daughter is so 孝顺. We didn't grow up learning about who Confucius was or whatever, but there is this weight of this 孝顺, filial piety, 孝.
And it's unsaid a lot of times.
It just is innate. I think it's, as people say, it's in your DNA. But then you have to think about the issue of being a 21st century woman working in America, dealing with this. And I don't say burden, because that's another thing I've learned from a Latina friend who said, I once had to take a survey, and it was titled The Burdens of Caregiving. She said, in our culture, we just do it. It's family. So even the linguistic choice of words is very key when we're talking about diversity and family caregiving.
I love that you say that, because words have so much power in it, and many words strung together, stories, as you know, have such an infinite amount of power to inspire someone or make them feel bad. So as a collector of these stories, were there any patterns that you saw in terms of stories throughout AARP in terms of caregiving?
Well, it's not just AARP. Literally, you could be sitting in the airport, and I once heard a woman desperately trying to make a call because her mother's care had fallen through or something. So it's universal, right? And so that's why, as a person who deals with stories and words, I've been trying to say that there are ways to empower ourselves. Number one, to reach out for the tools and resources that are available. AARP has fantastic things in print and online. And so I've been using this little funny thing that I'm saying is I started this journey out as the dragging daughter. Draggin. Dragon.
I read that.
I'm dragon. With fatigue, with worry, all the exhaustion, but I want to empower myself with knowledge, with other people's experience, with shared stories into the dragon daughter, Dragon.
That could be almost like a hashtag nowadays. Yeah, the dragon daughter, and I love the multi-layer of meaning behind that.
Yeah.
When you found out about your mother's ailing situation, and you had to take a year off of work to take care of her, kind of what are some bullet points, or what are some words of wisdom that you can share with other people in your shoes?
Yes. I think it's really important for family caregivers to know what is out there. Number one, there are advocates who can help with these policy and other issues because there are implications for the workplace, right? So try and read up on things that advocates are doing related to family caregiving.
And where do you find that?
There are wonderful resources on AARP's website, as well as other things that they have produced. Okay. The main thing is to understand that there are workplace accommodations that can be done for family caregivers. Then another aspect is to understand that there are medical things. And so for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, I've been noticing that for those of us who are like 1.5 generation like myself, we do speak some Chinese, but it's like past the salt or very basic.
Yeah,
right?
I just get discounts at Chinatown or something. Yeah.
So I've been thinking I would really like to put together a bilingual glossary, English and Chinese. Because, my God, how do you say incontinence pads in Mandarin Chinese? Catheter in Cantonese? There are needs for us, and especially in this years of technology, to make our own resources. So I think caregivers, family caregivers, really need to know what tools are out there because there are financial implications. Maybe some people need to look into long-term care insurance. There are other things that they could do. Then also they have to understand the implications themselves of paying out of their own pocket to cover things for their parents. So there are huge, huge implications for being a family caregiver. Financial, your own personal sort of spiritual. You've got to take time to rest and find respite. That's a word, respite care. Then there are all of the medical things you have to understand because it's more and more complicated now. People with chronic illnesses are taking so many medications. But also I think for us, the linguistic is very key. We have a generation that might have come who are not really fluent in English. We become the interpreters. We grew up doing that. We spoke for them. So there's a role reversal and understanding that does happen. But then also I call it the interpreter because our own cultures, Asian American and Pacific Islander, may not want to talk about death, but you do have to plan ahead for end-of-life care. You do have to think about things like living wills and things like that. So we're also cultural ambassadors, cultural interpreters between two cultures and two heritages.
Wow, so getting organized, getting connected to people and getting connected to yourself. I love that you bring up the whole spiritual side and spiritual practice. Because some people, when I say spiritual practice, they're like, woo, woo, woo. But it's not about that. Spiritual practice is working out, taking walks in nature, taking time for, quiet time for yourself, meditating, so that you can be centered because you can't be a good caregiver if you don't care for yourself, right?
There's only 24 hours in a day. And there are about 27 hours work of things to do.
Absolutely.
So you have to take care of yourself as a caregiver.
So how do you take care of yourself?
It's been difficult because other than having paid caregivers, there's really no time to step away because anyone stepping away from my mom and her condition, she could hurt herself. She could fall. So it's been a real hard thing to figure out how to do that. And I don't think I've got it down yet.
I don't think anybody's ever got it down. I think throughout all these stories that I've heard about caregiving, whatever generation, there's a lot of the same thread going through all the stories. It's you're not alone in this. talk to other people, care and share, right? Connect to them, and take care of yourself. And as long as you continue the dialogue and the stories, then you're okay. It's a start, right?
Yes.
So, a question I have for you, being a professional purveyor of stories and collector of stories, is the biggest thing, whether you're Asian, like my parents are Asian, I'm Asian American, grew up here in America, there is sort of a don't ask, don't tell kind of policy. They don't talk about many things, personal, professional, spiritual, sexual, anything. So how do you, what advice can you give to other people about extrapolating these stories from a culture that is so deep-seated in kind of not speaking so much and not communicating their story?
I've been really interested in seeing the evolution of my mom because she came without knowing a word of English, has now lived 50 plus years in America. I would say don't stereotype our elders. She's pretty funky, you know. And
a lot of them are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very
And
spunky too. Yeah.
Spunky, absolutely. Yeah. She couldn't have survived walking out of China as a 17-year-old and then, making her way. So I think one thing that I've learned is give them credit for knowing more about what they need. Don't speak or think for them. I think we shouldn't stereotype these Asian or Asian American things on both sides. I think if we could try to have some family dialogue, because it really is good for the entire family unit, give that a try first. I know that not every parent will, but of the two, one of them will.
That's so interesting. And I think after my father passed away, my mom started opening up more about they were dating and courting each other and how they used to like to go ballroom dancing. And I think that's really important because in my head growing up, I'm like, oh, mom and dad don't want to talk about anything. And so I never got my story about my dad from him.
Right.
And so I'm trying to get that from my mom.
Yes, good.
So I thank you for that. That's that's a light bulb for me because it's the start is just start opening up, start asking these questions. You'll be surprised at what you get back.